Hey everybody, Stu Smith here and Jeff Nichols with another tactical fitness report. And today we're going to talk about toughness. And it's one of those questions if you go down the internet rabbit hole of defining toughness, you'll find everything from a little bit of psychology, a little bit of physiology, the old saying, it's what is it? 10% mental, 90% or no, 10% physical, 90% mental. What does that mean actually? So, what brought this up was I had a couple of active SEALs come back over Thanksgiving, and we were just talking, doing they come back and do a little workout with some of the new guys, and all the new guys ask stupid questions, and it's just a fun little kicking some questions around and they get all pumped up, when they meet some guys that have kind of been there in their shoes and have moved on, which is just fun to see. I'm very fortunate to see that, and
That's
you know,
exactly why my camera's turned around, Stu, because I have some active duty SEALs that we've trained that are here.
yeah,
And so it's like the same thing. Like we get into conversations because you see this massive, amazing perspective shift.
oh yeah,
So it's fun to engage with those guys for
oh
sure.
absolutely, and it's funny because my post that I did on Thanksgiving Day, I usually put a big picture up and we're all working out, and it's like, I just put a black picture and I want you to like picture this, right? We had active duty SEALs, some retired SEALs. They all came back, and it's just been a lot of fun doing workouts. It was rainy, it was cold, it was dark. It was just a grindy little workout, and nothing fancy, just this like Murph like style workout that we got done in less than an hour. But at the end, it was these SEALs were taking questions and giving little buds motivation, and in the background I have music playing, and it just so happened to like come up on Freebird, right? And it was like, this is America. I mean,
Right?
it doesn't get any
Yeah.
better. The sun was coming up. We just finished a workout and Freebird's playing. It was anyway.
Ideal.
I wanted to set the scene because one of them made a really interesting point, and he said that he's just noticing some of the new guys are coming in and they're just not that aggressive. And we can look at it a couple of things, like, is it aggressiveness, is it toughness? They're all obviously tough because they made it through training. They're having some aggressiveness issues, and even some of the high school collegiate athletes were a little bit less aggressive when it comes to some of the job stuff. And these aren't guys like old guys that are making fun of the younger generation, right? These are guys like 5 to 8 years out of high school.
Right.
And one of them had a little theory, and it's like, whenever they first got in, COVID was there. They had to mask up. They had to quarantine. Even during boot camp, and they were told, "Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this," and it was this little bit of a you know pause, and anything they did, they had to think, like, should I do this?
Right.
Um, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of that's what's causing it, because I think I think that's not really the big issue. They said they can teach aggression, especially with Buds
Right.
graduates and
Yep.
SQT graduates. But he goes, their general toughness has to be um, has to also still be there. And then that got me thinking, like, what is toughness? And anyway, I went down this rabbit hole that I'll take you down after your initial thoughts, um, because it was some really neat physiology and psychology that I read about, and I sent you some of the what I had read. But anyway, I'll just get your comments on just the basics, introduction to this toughness aggressiveness
Yeah.
duo.
I think at any time you and I could pick a topic and we probably gotten asked that, or it's been on our sphere of teaching for at any point, right? Whether it's toughness or best way to do this or that, the other. And so like that's when you reached out to me and we caught up a little bit, and like I was just experiencing the same thing, funny enough. Like I really just came off a conversation with my wife, with Catherine, and some of the guys in the class. We have someone visiting that's going to come visit back through train with us from Australia. He's coming back through, and he was one of the classes we had, and this last class and some of the classes that we've had in previous, like, and this is not a blanket statement, but so we've just finished our 12th class. We've done a tons, like 100 other whatever, but like point is like you start kind of seeing trends in behavior sociologically. Like we come here and our real goal is like we're focusing on improving their physicality, but you start getting to know these guys and their story a little bit, and over the years the story that's playing out in my head is less about Jeff Nichols, the operator, and more about I like being a coach. I love it. So I'm able to step back more. Like I'm not trying to also be the best athlete. I'm just trying to be the best coach. I'm not trying to fit in and say I can still do this like I used to do. My point is that because of my ability to step back and really coach, I've had to become more personal. I've had to build some relationships, not like best friend, but I've had to work on the coach-athlete relationship rather than I don't care what you think, I'm sterile, go fucking do it, blah, blah, like be. So now I care enough to get to know these. My point is I get the feeling as well that there's this, and it's hard, you can't pinpoint it, like you say, but I get this feeling that there is this erosion of toughness, not because people aren't willing to do it. It seems to me that what they're focused on emotionally is less about what more can I do to physically be ready. And now it's more like asking all of these sociological questions about how to prepare, like, like stuff like we get like, what music did I listen to before my missions? What, like, is it, what do I think of like having a girlfriend at Bud's? All these things that to me, they sound like in this category of what it's like, they're trying to build up this rationale inside of them to go do this thing that they can't practice doing. It's like where you and I, it's like, dude, you just got to get as prepared as you can and go. You got to go into the fire. Like you can't touch the fire and see if it's hot. It's hot.
Yeah, you got to do it.
Yeah, right. And so I see more people trying to front load with sociology questions than, hey, how do I get more push-ups and how do I endure these things, or how can I get closer to the assurity that I'm ready, instead of, well, is the lifestyle that I have after Bud's going to be awesome? Like that's where I start. I see more people, more fanboys now than I do serious people.
That's a good point. I will say this, sometimes that coach-student relationship does get a little blurry, and then you start getting asked those kind of questions versus, right. And I take that as, Jeff, be honest with you, you're a good coach. If they feel comfortable asking you those questions, that just means you're a good coach.
Right.
But I also see where you're coming from of like, none of this matters.
Right.
Yeah. None of this matters. Whatever answer I give you doesn't matter. Right? Do you run a 4-mile timed run on hard pack or soft sand? You know what? Doesn't matter. You just got to do it.
Yeah. Right. Because I think it's easy for us to say this because we're through it. And that's why I was like the perspective of guys. But I also like, to your point, like, I think that's, how do I say this? Like that's the whole genesis of all this. And I know guys get closer, like, but they're almost like you too. It's like, they're half my age.
Oh yeah. And
so I'm also like, wait a minute, like, where was I at in that timeline and timepiece? And would I be asking the same questions? And I can't really do that because I'm removed from that timeline too much. But I also like, for me, I don't want them to be a carbon copy of me. They're good enough. Like the world doesn't need more of me.
No, I got you.
The world needs whatever they have exponentially grown in that environment.
True.
That's where the shift for me is like, I love being a good coach, but I want them to recognize their potential and not compare it to mine because they're kicking ass, Like,
yeah,
and
that's
I
a good
say
point.
This too, like the people that have the most questions are the ones that are most physically capable.
That's true.
And that's a weird part. You're like, dude, you're a fucking stud.
You're killing it.
Go kick some ass and like, then like come report to me when you get through it. Cause then it's like fucking high fives. and then we can really have the conversations that matter then for
Yeah.
those like sociological. It's like, this is how I dealt with it, and probably I dealt with these things incorrectly. So that's also, then I can say, now that you're in the teams, you see what I'm talking about. Now do you see the importance of this, that, and the other, or treating people right and things like that? Because those intangible things don't make sense, like you say,
Mm.
until you get there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I'm going to take you down this little rabbit hole because, just to prepare for this, toughness is such an arbitrary term. I mean, I think everybody has their own definition to it. I will say this, if you're trying to train toughness, there is a fine line between mentally tough and stupidity, right? So if you're training that border, I mean, which I don't recommend doing all the time. Sure, you need a little gut check here and there just to make sure you want it, but you can train toughness a lot easier. And that sounds weird to say, but it doesn't have to be kicking the nuts hard. It can be as simple as
Being
you have,
consistent.
you have a 5 a.m. workout. So that means you got to go to bed early, a little discipline there. You have to wake up early. It's 28 degrees outside. So that's going to suck as soon as you walk out the door, but you go do it anyway. That's one of those little scoops of toughness that you get just from making your workouts timed at a little bit difficult time and temperature.
Right.
Um,
I 100% agree, Stu. I think that you, and I mean, like, what you do on a daily basis is the definition of, like, you show up every day to these guys that are hungry and try to fake it, and hungry and don't fake it and are doing it. And every single day, that's the hardest thing. You want to be mentally tough, consistently be that, like, every day, be like Stu Smith, like that, like, honestly, like, and I think that that's like I always say about buds. What's the hardest thing about buds? That is 26 weeks long. Because most any given day in buds, for an example, you're not really doing one event that's extraordinarily hard. Some are a bit of a gut check, but it's the day in and day out, the unsexiness of it. Like, and I think that cumulative
oh yeah,
slow kick in the teeth is way worse than a couple days that you're just gonna grind to a pulp.
oh yeah. Well, it is the grind that gets you. It's
Yeah,
it's on your feet all day, moving. You might not be working out, but you're doing something.
you bet.
So yeah, that just beats up on you, and you're tired. But anyway, I went down this rabbit hole, Jeff, and you've done a little bit of physiology studying, a little bit of psychology studying, and so I obviously toughness has a physiological component and a psychological component, right? So with that in mind, I started searching around, and I don't want to call it research because I was just Googling stuff. It's not really research, but I'm Googling things and, found a couple of PhD studies um, from psychologists, that were on that topic of toughness. And they even create, something I had never even heard of. You got the cognitive part of the brain that is focused on thinking, it's intellectual accumulation, its experiences. That cognitive part of the brain is kind of what makes us human, right? And then you have that sensation part of the brain, emotions, touch, feel, smell, all of those things. You even have, the reptilian part of the brain that has the 4 F's in it, which
Yep.
everybody loves. Was it food, fight, flight, and reproduction,
Yep.
right? Those are the 4 F's of survival. And um, and then you have what I had never really heard of was the conative part of the brain. Conativ. Conation, conative. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, Jeff, to be honest with you. So
I'm sure.
I went down another rabbit hole and found some PhD studies on this part of the brain. And if you think about, you got the thinking part of the brain, cognitive. You got the sensation part of the brain, which is feeling, right? Emotion, feeling, all that, senses. And then you have the doing part of the brain, which is what they call Conation, right?
Right.
Cognitive. Um, which the unique thing about that is it helps us override the thinking and the feeling part of the brain. So when I wake up at 5 a.m. and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm really comfortable right now. I feel comfortable. I don't really want to get up right now because I'm so comfortable. And then there's a part of my brain that says, it's 25 degrees outside. You could get frostbite. It's probably not wise for you to go outside. But
Right.
then there's another part of my brain that says, go do it anyway.
Right.
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 And that can be attitude. And that's where I started equating it into this is our toughness side of the brain.
Yep.
Because if it's able to override evolutionary processes that keep us alive, it can go for good and evil. Don't get me wrong. I mean,
Right.
probably the same part of that brain is a criminal mastermind, right? Is doing things that he should not be doing and knows better, right? But at the same time, I think it is our toughness part of brain and deserves a little bit more understanding in us.
Yep.
And how do we develop that? How do we develop that attitude and that toughness and um, just being durable enough to mentally handle, the stresses, not only life, but an event that you want to finish,
Right.
and then
All sorts of things.
we
Yeah.
can apply it to spec ops selections as well.
Right. I think when you were sharing this with me, I think initially my response was like, we can say we probably accept the idea that our brain has been functioning like that forever, or so now we're able to put terms to it because we're able to read, like, that's where technology is really giving us this advantage in a way that's like not just put a term to it but start looking measurable. Because what I'm starting to hear a little bit and started really got my thinking is what you're talking about is so much of what Catherine's taught me on the awareness piece. Not
Oh,
because the conation isn't just the fight or flight mechanism. It's I'm aware of the gravity of this potential threat, but I've been able to stress inoculate myself or teach myself over a period of time so that when I encounter that, the conation part of my brain is reacting in the way that's trained,
ah,
steeped in behavior. So I think
nice.
that that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this trend, this big trend in mental toughness. We talked about that like 15 years ago,
Oh,
you right?
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
now it's evolved into measurable aspects of mental toughness, which those measurable aspects of mental toughness are all coming around through awareness and breath work.
Yeah.
And that's how they're able to measure it too. Like, how are they measuring the brain and saying there's significant this or that? And it's like, so I think it's, that's what the really cool part is, because special warfare training, being a SEAL, whatever it may be, or being an extreme athlete, skydiver, things like that, when risk is always inherently there and there's the right practice in place, like buds, the practices to stress inoculate, those practices are in place with the right person, then what do you get? You get this. You get a mentally tough person where, because of the teaching is sound, the environment for learning that teaching is sound. There's a long history of people successfully navigating that practice in that environment. So what does Buds keep doing? It keeps spitting out legitimate candidates to be SEALs. So I think that the conation side for me is, if you look at these really long tenured, successful things like the Naval Academy at large, what does it do? It practices conation on this very, big scale, we'll say.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And even, I went down another rabbit hole of an older study that I have referred to a couple of times. Didn't really understand it because it's more of the chemistry in the brain of what's happening. I think whenever you have this conation overriding certain things, and they were able to measure that people who were able to do this graduate spec ops training, all these had a higher amount of neuropeptide Y than the average person. And this is a Yale study by a psychiatrist, Charles Morgan.
Is it by chance talking about like setting neural pathways, like
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, all of that, which is
Okay.
done through consistent training,
Right.
right, and
Right.
developing
You have
that.
that
But
severe
it is
environment.
also it goes back to like defining your why. Like, why are you doing this? You
Yep.
know, your why has to help you override those thinking and feeling parts of your brain.
Yep. And I think if the environment is correct, right, people can, like I say, let go and like go for it, go for broke, right? Like go like we have a when we are, you know, I think one of the limiting factors of toughness sometimes is we have that golden parachute that's our family, maybe. And so they're less likely to go like heck. But when you get into an environment like Buds, where you're surrounded by a bunch of people that are like willing to go like heck and maybe look foolish doing so, but for good reason,
Yeah.
it gives that environment to set those neural pathways.
Yeah, in fact, I just pulled it up real quick, and one of the quotes in the study, Dr. Morgan goes, "The neuropeptide Y was released at a greater rate from these graduates, and it seems like they had fewer symptoms of confusion or mental disconnection during stress um, were reported."
So the question for me then would be like, and again, this answer, like, if we were to interview those individuals that had that higher peptide, my questions would be like, what was your family life like? Where did you grow up? Like, what was your first job? And how did you like? And so Stanford came out with a study a long time ago for Buds. They did like what, 4 classes, and they said they ranked things like highest percentage success. And one was like, if you're a wrestler or water polo, like in things, and you start, and so we get down to the cliches of like, be comfortable getting uncomfortable,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah,
I do believe that there's a certain, we're, like maybe we are genetically born with that disposition. Some of us, like maybe you and I were, but I think that because of your environment, my environment, like it was fostered. But then the one question still is like, I was always like this, and I'm sure you were too.
yeah. You know, I always worked out in the morning. Yeah, I did the math the other day. I said I have been working out before my day starts for 40 years now.
So there's your mental top. Like, so that's like what, and it's such an obvious no kidding.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's like to say, if you save like $10 a month every month for whatever, you'll be a millionaire by the age of 18. And you're like, that's another example of it. Like
Yeah,
I
I mean,
started
I
working
started
out
doing
when I was
that like
12.
14 years old, and
Mine not
it's
mine not early. Like mine's been all over the place. But at 12 years old, I got my first gym membership, and now I'm in the gym, and
yeah,
so that's what I'm saying. Like I do believe, and not to get too woo woo on you on this, there's a real aspect of like, for lack of a better term, God. Like there really is like your disposition,
oh
my
yeah,
disposition to go, like, because Catherine this morning was like talking about you. She's like, man, like, because she knew the topic we were going to talk about, and she's like, Stu is up right now, like he's like already training with the guys doing this, that, and the other. And she's like, because we're having a hard time waking up. We're like taking caffeine and beta alanine to try to wake up, and Stu's already finishing his workout. And I was like, how is he doing that? But it's
that's a good point. It also comes down to, I think, how bad you want something, and then that has to almost turn into this consistent habit, and then the next thing you know,
the behavior.
you have these habits for a lifetime.
Yeah, it's not even a
And
habit anymore, Stu. It's your behavior. You are
yeah,
absolutely behave in a predictable manner that is like I never was a morning person until about 3 or 4 years ago. My wife, because she is so consistent, reliable, dependable, like I was able to see that on a daily scale and go, I kind of really actually would. She's seen her dispositions way better in the morning, and now
yeah,
it's like that's what I've become. So my habits have become my behavior. Is it a morning person thing? I don't know, man. Like I
I
think
don't
that
either.
probably like you, a person has got to pick a time in their day to create space for things they want to do. Just
Yeah.
like you
Well,
said.
yeah, I will tell you, my wife is completely different time as I am. In fact, if we were like a Navy uh, Navy department, right? If we were like somewhere in the military, we would pretty much almost be standing watch 24/7. Right? That's how much I'm a zombie by like 8:30, 9 o'clock, starting to ramp it up, go to bed by 9. She's just getting started. And like she's most productive between like 9 p.m. and 2,
Oh
sometimes
wow.
3 in the morning. Now
Oh
she'll
boy.
sleep till like 11 or 12, but her productivity time's different than mine. And sometimes I'm waking up and she's just going to bed. I'm
Port
like,
and starboard. Yeah.
all right, I
Yeah.
got to watch.
Exactly. Right. But see, you both have worked through that over. You've been married for what?
Yeah, 30 years this year.
There you
Yeah,
go. You've had
yeah,
really good practice in doing it. So I think that that's ultimately what we're looking at is like everyone wants to be like when they hear mental toughness, they go, I want that, whatever that is. And the answer is it takes habit long enough for you to create behavior to get that. And
yeah,
it's not like this moment you like wake up and like, do I have mental toughness? Like it's hard to say like when you ask, when are you an adult?
yeah, yeah.
It's the same.
And you made a good a point too about investing. It's very much like investing. And it is it's an evolutionary process because all of us get inspired to want to do something. Something inspired us. It may have been when I was 11 years old and saw Rocky, right? And I was like, I want to start working out. That looks really cool, right?
Right?
And started reading Muscle Mag, books and watching
Yes.
Arnold and things like that.
Yes.
Something like that was inspirational. And then I had this motivation, like I'm going to go train, right, and start working out. And then, the motivation dies, right? You're no longer really that motivated anymore, but
Right.
because while you're in that motivational phase, you've created these habits, right? You can now rely on those habits to take you to another level where you don't need motivation. You've
Right.
now built discipline through your habits and consistency. You have this discipline, and that is where, because of this discipline, you're doing workouts even when you don't feel like it. It's cold, it doesn't matter, it's raining. Who cares? You're going to get it done because you're going to
Yeah.
get it done. And then that becomes this mental toughness that we're looking for.
Yep.
Like,
And then
there's
when you
not this poster or inspirational thing that's going to give you mental toughness. It is that evolution that you have to take,
you
to
want to
really
embody it,
go to
right?
mental
I think that
toughness.
that's the thing is like you and I or other people like in our sphere that people look up to will say like there is that sense of kind of we were talking early like I want to aspire to not just be that person. I'm trying to aspire to embody what they seem to collectively just have, right? Like someone's put together. It's like people that are trying to get put together are going to get drawn to the people that seem to be put together. I know it's like whether it's, and I think that podcast has been a real good service for people to find long form conversation that like, you flip through and see like we said, I talked on the phone the other day. It's like your way of coaching is very likely going to keep the people attracted to your way of coaching that are like have whatever like-mindedness to you. Like my aversion in ways of coaching, the way I broadcast it and advertise it on social media, I'm going to attract probably people that have that same internal aversion for training.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that like, but that's one of the really cool things about social media now is that there's enough people out there with enough ways of doing it that if people are pick the right timeline, don't go see a recruiter until it's time, they get the numbers they want, like they can really build that mental toughness through that patience of practice in that first year to 18 months. I think that that's a real, like when guys come here for 6 weeks, you say like it takes at least 6 weeks to build a habit.
I would agree.
We really, really talk about that on a daily basis for weeks until it's like, okay, you either started or you haven't. Like whether it's some form of meal prep or being consistent with your weight time, whatever it is, like whatever you think you can make changes in yourself to make your self value feel better. Like your self worth.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what we're trying to do is mental toughness ultimately comes down to self-worth.
Yeah. I agree. You know, it's funny how all of this kind of snowballed. And it's weird how these things just happen in life. You know, I had that conversation with the SEALs at Thanksgiving. Kicked back a few things with you. I got an email the other day, and this one's what really put me over the edge and said, I got to talk about this. And it just goes, Hey, Stu, I have a quick question. What's your opinion on the mental aspect of training for SF besides the physical? He says he's got an idea, but it'd be easier to know what you think would be helpful in strengthening this. I've only seen the physical aspects of training, and I want to be on the top of my class wherever I go through the pipeline. So that was a really good question, I thought. Um, but it also seems like he also knows the answer, right? And he also has a really good why. You know,
The answer is
I
in the question.
yeah, I don't want to be just a graduate and show up at these schools. I want to crush this school. Right there alone.
Yep.
You got
I
the
heard
right
the same thing.
mindset.
Yeah, I heard
You,
it when you read it. I was like, this
yeah,
dude's already on it. Like,
yeah, he's got the right mindset, got the right
already.
attitude. Because if you think about what Conation is, it is your attitude and your mindset. It doesn't matter. You're just going to work hard to be the very best. And for a quick answer to the person, I just basically said, through your physical fitness training and your daily habits and if you want to make things a little tougher, you can with the time of day that you train and the temperature that's outside, or whatever little things like that make it tougher. But you're going to get it a scoop at a time, a day at a time. You're going to be a little bit tougher. There are some workouts, because it is early, dark, and cold and windy, that every step I take, I feel like I am getting tougher.
Yep.
You know?
Right. If a person, honestly, and I think like that's real true, like, and you see it play out because you see guys on a daily basis. If a man shows up, we'll say hypothetically, and for a year, 1 year, this individual trains on a daily basis or some goal oriented, like I'm going to train as much as I can for a year to prepare for this thing, whether it's SEAL, SF, whatever it might be. And they do it day in and day out, and they deal with some sickness. They do it all the whole calendar year. They do it, and the whole time, no one's making them do it.
Right.
That is the first biggest step in mental toughness. Where that's why I was like, when people are always asking these sociological questions instead of how do I best prepare for this thing, because if in that year, you already said it, in that preparation, that is where the person can build that sense of I can do this.
Yes.
We can't build that sense of I can do this unless they can really look back and go, man, for the last year, 18 months, man, like I've been going at it and no one's been making me do it. And I've been doing it around a job, and I've been doing it around this, and I've been doing it around weather, and I've been doing it.
No excuses.
And then they're like, man, I'm so much better a year from now. Like, I'm like, oh my God, like I've got the numbers. I'm doing great.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know what? I guess in a nutshell, we could, I know we went down a couple of different rabbit holes here of this and that, but think about what we have in our brain. We have the thinking part of our brain, the feeling part of our brain, and we're trying to focus on that doing part of the brain, right? And we need all three, but what we're really talking about is that doing part of brain, which largely really depends on why are you doing this in the first place, and your attitude about doing it regardless of what life is throwing at you.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's we can't. I mean, if we spent time with 100 SEALs and we started writing down like a flow chart of like reasons they came in, what's their purpose, background and demographic, what we're ultimately probably would see is a pretty obvious sort of pie chart or something that's like, and it goes back to just what are this person's intangibles that you really can't measure unless you've
Right.
been doing it for a while. Like, like, and that's what you see is, and that's why I think I like coaching so much in this. What we do is because I don't have to be biased to a branch of service. I'm just going to be biased to consistent hard work.
Yes. Yes. That is the key.
Yeah.
That you're right. It doesn't really like I have people today that were Army, Navy, Marine Corps, police, and we got the same workout done,
Yep.
right? And it's all going to apply to their next steps. And it's you're right. It's
Yeah.
hard, consistent work is going to be what puts you over the edge, no matter what.
Right. It's not something that's readily sold because either people can't really put words to it, or when they try to put words to it, it's not this 3-week sort of seminar to get like, I'm gonna go to see Tony Robbins and now I've got this mental toughness.
Right.
Like,
You know what? I think it's best told in stories. I think throughout history we've had this verbal history of, people before us, and
yep.
one of my favorite stories is, this kid only could come see me on the weekends. He came in and he came to the pool, college athlete, stud, absolute stud, could not swim to save his life. And we were, all right, let me see what you got in the pool. And he got across the pool, and I noticed he's like excited. Like he's going, yes, it was a horrible swim. It was probably like 20 strokes to get across the pool. But he got to the other side and he was excited. And I said, whoa, what is up? Because that was horrible. I didn't say that out loud, but I was like, you're killing me over here. He goes, that was the first time I've ever swum across a pool. I said, no shit. I
Yeah.
said, man, that is awesome. Good
Yeah.
job. So I'm celebrating with him. And
Right.
then we're like, we're going to fix this. Now let's fix this stroke. We fixed it in that day. It took about an hour. We fixed his stroke, and he's able to do it in like 7, 8 strokes now. And then I couldn't see him for a while, right? And I didn't see him for probably about 2 months. He had to go back to school, finish up his last semester. And then he comes back in the summer, and he's swimming 500 yards, less than 10 minutes. Not beautiful, but consistent, getting it done. And what did that just show me? That showed me he worked on a horrible weakness, had a potential of falling in water and drowning a year ago. And now he's swimming laps, you know, just to pass this fitness test.
Yeah.
So that story there shows me, one, the amount of work that he override, that thinking and that feeling part of the brain, because he was going to do it. He was going to accomplish this.
Yeah.
And fast forward a year later, that guy's making it through buds. Fast forward a year later, he's on his first deployment. He's active duty SEALs today.
Yep.
And that was a level of toughness that I think a lot of people don't really think about, right? They just think about how much can you grind. This guy, actually beat a fear of water that had been plaguing him all his life.
Yeah.
That's big. That's
It's
tough as
huge
hell.
because and that is something you can't give somebody. They have
No.
to do it themselves, and that's such a rooting position. It roots you where you're at. Like I remember I don't remember the exact instant where I was like mental toughness became a thing, but I remember the moment really to this day where it became its own sphere in my own mindset. Like I knew I had to work hard and things like that at a young age. I was a small child, and to me, like the people I looked up to, it was hard work that got them there, like Bob Feller and like all these athletes, the time. And I'm from Iowa, and I grew up in a community where wrestling is a juggernaut, like, 7 straight state titles at one point in Iowa wrestling.
Nice.
For the team, national rankings, they're still they're number 3 in the state right now. They got beat by the number 2 yesterday. But anyway, my point is I was privy to the University of Iowa Hawkeye wrestling team, and Dan Gable was the coach at the time.
Woo.
And every Saturday or Sunday, we would drive either to the university or we drive to another high school in Iowa City. Like Iowa City High is a big 4A juggernaut in wrestling too. And so we'd always have different teams and schools at our practices and vice versa. So we went there one Sunday. Practice came to an end. The number one high school wrestler in the country was there at Iowa City High, a guy by the name of Jeff McGinnis. He's since, I mean, this is in like 1995, 94.
Okay.
So he signed with Iowa, and Dan Gable was there at the high school during our practice. And the practice comes to an end, and Coach Gable starts talking to the big, two big wrestling teams in this wrestling room in Iowa City. And I don't remember the exact interaction that I had, but it was around mental toughness. And he was like, does anybody here know what it takes to be mentally tough? And like, it was kind of like crickets. And he's like, does anybody want to know? My hand freaking like, bam, give me this, man. Like, give me something. Cause at that point in the game, I knew I wasn't a good wrestler. I could work hard. Cause my weight class was a state champion. The weight class above me was a state champion. The weight class above me, it was a state champion again. So for me, it was work for baseball. But my long story short is Coach Gable at that point, right? He's got 27 national titles as a coach. Mm. He looks at me as he's looking at the crowd, but he's looking at me and he goes, there's always somebody out there meaner, tougher, and badder than you. And then he kind of smirked and looks at me and goes, or you can be that son of a bitch.
Damn.
And I'm talking that day, boy. That day, I'm telling you this. I've had a conversation with Coach Gable since then, a bunch.
Oh,
and I always tell him this is this. So he knows me by name from that story because he's at every home meet, and I always go up to him and say hi. And he's like, Nichols, how are you, man? Because he also knows my background too. Because the book he signed me, he had a friend of mine that wrestled Iowa. He had one of his books, and he signed it, and it says on the inside cover, he goes from like wrestler to SEAL. Clearly, you know what it takes to get it done. That's what he wrote on the inside cover. And so my point is you're right. Put yourself in that position to be motivated, to anchor yourself. But it gave me a sense that this can be done because it takes no talent to freaking work hard. That's free.
That's awesome.
Yep. So that changed me, man. I was 14 years old, and to this day, like you said, it's not about the grind, but within that consistency, can I be really accurate? That's harder than anything for me, is to show up every day and whatever I've got in the tank, give my best.
Yeah.
That to me is fulfilling.
Yeah, I would agree. You do have to show up every day, and that's probably the first half of it, is just showing up. But the other half is, how intense are you going to go? How what is your capability of making that a good workout?
Right.
Yeah. And, just those two things alone, you'll find toughness. I promise you.
100% you will. 100%. Yeah. So we could go down. Maybe we'll have a conversation after this and we'll find another rabbit hole to go down. Cause I think maybe we do try to categorize, what are the 4 things that we see that makes people mentally tough or something. I think that there's a lot of ways we could go with it.
Oh man. So many.
But ultimately, or maybe it's if you were to I think you and I did this hypothetical build the perfect SEAL.
Yeah.
What sports to play this. And maybe we do on the mental side, what skills or tasks or jobs or what, I always tell, if you, when I ask people, they want to be a SEAL and they're in high school or college, you're what did you do growing up? Did you
summer jobs?
Were you playing sports? Were you jobs? Were you sedentary? And so maybe, and a lot of that's practice. It's just practice of being mentally tough.
I love it.
In Iowa, and my first job was a dairy farm, and it's cold to get up in January and go milk cows. It sucks.
Yeah.
Especially when they're not your cows, you know? So there's all those things that when I hear people tell me their story, I'm like, this dude is going to kill it with or without me. So it gives me a chance to give good guidance anyway. And I know it's just, he's going to reap all the benefits from it because he's just a sponge, Not like one of the guys that's here right now is just a sponge. And you're he's going to go do it, So let's give him the tools that where he's he can surround himself with that habit.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Yeah. So if you guys have questions, just send them in the comments section. I think we'll post this both on our pages, and you we will read your questions and maybe come up with a round two of this one somehow, like you said, and um,
See what
maybe
happens.
come up with some the perfect history of mental toughness.
Right? Yeah, because it's a moving target, but
Oh my God, you go in so many different
it's all
ways. Yeah,
relative.
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff. Well, thank you very much again. Don't forget, folks, Jeff Nichols can be found over at Jeff CSCS over on Instagram, and his website is performancefirstus.com. You can find me over at StuSmithFitness.com, and we'll be here. Take your questions when if you got them. So once
Appreciate
again,
you.
Jeff, hey, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.